Good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to the Deal Scout. This show is about deals and deal makers. So, we're going to get to know some deal makers, learn about their story, what kind of deals they work on, and maybe some advice for a deal you are working on. So, Steve, I want to welcome you to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, sure. My name is Steve Weldon. I work primarily with public companies. I've done a lot of equity raise in the past. So I started off as a typical route as a CPA, got my degree, did some public accounting work, and worked in tax for a while. And then I got introduced to some private equity guys who were working with small microcap companies. And I kind of came in and kind of fell into this and started working with them on fixing issues they had. A lot of these entities had issues with not the filings not being up to date, had some bad management, things like that. And I would typically kind of go in and just clean them up, get them back where they needed to be. So it's kind of the path I've had for about the last 10, 12 years is working on those types of companies.
So, when you say microcap, what size in terms of revenue and employees? Like, what kind of companies were you
So
working with?
you're talking primarily under 100 million.
Okay.
So that would probably be I know we got one up to about 350 at one point. So just kind of depends on how the market's going that day a lot of times. So, and
Yeah.
usually it would be a small team. Usually I would exit about the time that we would get a management team in there. So that was kind of when after about five people, I kind of get not want to be a part of it anymore.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is great. I think it's so important for entrepreneurs and for people in, deal makers to know their favorite place in a business, what kind of business to be in,
Right,
what stage of business to be in, and then what the hell do we do within the business to serve them. So,
right.
talk to us about like how did you figure out your sweet spot for the kind of businesses you like to work with, what you do for them, and at what stage?
I think after working in a large company, working in public accounting for a while, I kind of like the idea of being on my own. And what was nice about doing this kind of work is being because it was a small team, and it was almost like working on your own. And that's kind of what I'm doing now is doing this as a consulting basis now that I've kind of moved on from that. But that was I kind of I like the smaller group. I don't like corporate politics. I like to stay out of that kind of stuff.
I'm the same way, man. I love startups. I love small businesses, the
Exactly.
hustle, the grind. I love that.
It is. I enjoy the grind. It's something that when you're working on something you enjoy, you don't mind staying up all night. I know there
Yeah.
was a company I was working with out in Las Vegas. I mean, we had something due to the city or the state of Nevada, and there was three of us. We stayed up all night working on the copy to get the documents right, and it was long, it was tough, but it was fun. So when you get into these smaller companies, they're fun. That's
Yeah.
something a lot of people find out quickly. They don't understand that this can be an all day, all night job sometimes
Right.
for
So,
years on end,
yeah.
depending on what you're into.
How in the world did you get into this business, right? Like when you were going through high school, is this the direction you thought you were going to be in terms of, companies looking to go public or public companies upgrading NASDAQ or raising capital? Like, is that the direction you would have thought you were going?
Wasn't even on my radar. Let's put it that way. This was completely by I don't want to say accident, just right place, right time. Um, I remember in high school, my calculus teacher, we would have short days, like once a month on a Wednesday. So she would invite somebody from the community to come in and talk about what they did for a living. And one day they had a guy come in. He was a CPA, and he was playing a video, I guess by the AICPA or something like that, in the room. And then while he's playing the video, he's writing on the board all the different jobs you could have with a CPA license as a CPA. And I said, okay, so I just get that one degree and these are all my options. I was like, I'm in. That's what I'm doing. So
Wow.
that was the catalyst for that. And it's funny because my very first job was doing governmental and nonprofit auditing, which is completely different.
Yeah.
So just through some mutual friends and as a client that I picked up, just doing tax work on the side when I was working for a company doing as their tax manager, just somebody I had met, and he was working on these companies in a different space than I'm doing, and he needed somebody to do the CFO work. So I got involved with him, met a few other guys that were in private equity. He's more of an angel investor, and these guys were actually private equity funds. And that's just, I got a reputation of knowing how to fix the problems and get everything done. So that's how I found my way there. It was completely, I made the assumption when I got done is I was just going to have my own practice. I'd be the managing partner and doing all that kind of regular accounting stuff. And that's what I envisioned originally. So how I got here, it's just amazing how I found this little niche. So
Yeah. At what point did you realize that government work and maybe the nonprofit wasn't a good fit? Auditing specifically.
I did it for a year, if that tells you anything.
Get out of this crap. Yeah, I get it.
It wasn't bad. It was interesting. It's funny because in college, from my degree, you take one class in governmental accounting. And I remember, there's all the group of us that went through school together, went to a smaller school, so we were all in the same classes, and we all just like, oh, we'll never use this stuff. We'll never. And then my very first job, that's what I did, right out of school. So
Yeah. So, what when you mentioned a whole bunch of different acronyms, right? CPA and CFO, and then you mentioned PE and Angel. Well, Angel's not an acronym, but
right,
when it comes to CPA, the guy wrote certified, public accountant.
correct,
Here are all the freaking jobs you could have. Brrr. What kind of
right.
jobs did he kind of write up on the board?
Yeah, I don't specifically remember each one. I remember, it was like, you could be probably financial advisors, you could be a controller, you could be you could go into tax work, audit work, consulting work. There was just so many different things. And I thought, well, that just gives me so many options with one degree. So
Yeah.
that was my catalyst for going that way.
Yeah. Now, as a receiving your CPA, um, you look at different roles that you can do with the licensure, right? CFO, right? You could be
Correct.
the financial officer. You could be a controller. You can focus on taxes and audits, and getting. So, how did you find in this the part of the business as a CPA that you enjoy most? So, what is that for you? And how did you? I know that it was kind of serendipitous, but like
Right.
a day to day thing, what do you love most?
Um, when I got into, I'm a very project oriented person. So I love to work on a project. And so I think that's why I kind of like when I first got into this, the auditing was a little more, it's just one, you just kind of repeated the same thing as the year before. It wasn't that exciting. So I got into doing more tax work. And as it was kind of fun to pick up new clients doing tax work because it was a new project, it was something different. And when I was a tax manager for a timeshare company for 6 years, after about 6 years doing the same tax returns, it got boring.
Yeah.
So when I got the opportunity to move into something different, it was there's something new every day. It's funny. I was talking about doing a routine. Now that I'm doing this differently as a consultant, trying to do it myself, and I need to kind of get a routine going. And I was thinking to myself, I never had a routine the last 10 years because it was a lot of times you just wake up in the morning and see what who calls and figure out what fire you got going. And that's kind of what I did. I was just a firefighter a lot of times for these types of things. So there was no set schedule. You have certain filings that were due by a certain date that you work on, but every day was a new issue with an investor, with a board member, with an employee, with a filing attorney, or what your auditor's got a problem. There's always somebody's got a problem. That's just kind of what I did, was just, so there was no
And as a business owner, as the CEO of what's the name of your group?
Viking CFO.
Ah, I like it. So badass, right? So as the CEO of that your roles changed a little bit from in the past. The problems showed up in your inbox, and you just showed up, completed the work, and
Right.
then turned it off. As CEO, what have you noticed as the major differences that you're being faced with as not only the CFO of other groups and but also the CEO of your own company?
Well, now that I'm doing this on my own, I'm the CEO, and I also empty my own trash basket. So I go from one end all the way to the other. So I'm taking care of the admin work, I'm taking care of the sales and marketing, I'm taking care of doing the actual work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's you got to play all the roles, the hat with the hat.
Yeah. So with the name of your company, how did you come up with the Viking CFO? Because I'm looking at the pictures on the back of your wall, Viking ships going through.
Yes,
Like, how did you come up with that idea?
yes. It took me 4 months to get that from China. I didn't know that when I ordered it,
It looks great.
but it took up the whole wall, so I liked it. So my family background on my mother's side, her whole family is Norwegian.
Oh, cool.
So I was able to trace back. I've traced back, I think, most of her family and part of my grandmother's family, and they're all from Norway. So I actually have a copy of the certificate where my great grandfather signed in with all this paperwork into Ellis Island. I mean, it was like December of 1916. He came over, settled in. So he came through Ellis Island and settled in Staten Island, and that's where they all lived from there. So that's kind of where the Viking came from, since half the family is from Norway.
Very
So
cool. Very cool. So as you're building this and the work that you're doing, some of the things that you do is for a company looking to go public, right? Like
mhm.
this is a sweet spot that you got experience in and that you enjoy doing. What are some of the indicators where a company is ready to go public or should start considering going public?
So in the smaller companies, a lot of times there's a lot more opportunity for equity there. So you're not having to go through, when you do the private, going through this, seed, Series A, Series B, there's not a lot of liquidity there for your investors. So if you're able to get onto, say, the OTC or a small company on NASDAQ, something like that, that just opens yourself up to not only the VCs, private equity, but also opens you up for retail. So you get a lot of retail support in your company. So you're able to raise money a little bit differently going that direction.
Okay. So talk to us about some of the metrics to look for. What makes a company, an ideal candidate for going public versus definitely not a good fit for going public. You should stay away from that.
Um, I don't know if there's really any particular fit for it. Um, I know I've worked with some companies, particularly in those like biotech. They probably should have stayed private for a while before they went public, just to move the clinical trials a little further, a little bit more than what they had.
Hmm.
Um, I think that probably would have been something, a case of something that may not. You might want to make sure product's far enough along that you can at least create enough buzz around what you're doing, to that way you can create a market once you go public. Because
Yeah.
something people don't think about is when you go public, a lot of these big companies go public. That's great. Everyone's heard about all the big unicorns and everything when they go public, but they haven't heard about all the small companies. I mean, there's hundreds, thousands of companies out there, and now you're vying for the retailers' eyes. You want to get the average Joe to invest in your company. Well, you almost have to start selling your stock. You're selling your story. So that's when you get into road shows, visiting brokers, things like that. So it's I wouldn't say it's harder once you go public than what you would do on the other, staying private for a while. But if you got to raise capital, it's just another option. There are markets for that.
So there's some, for when it comes to liquidity for investors. So you've raised some
Right.
money. Public is a good way to create liquidity for your investors.
Right.
What other benefits are there for the company itself? So they get a larger pool of potential capital, so they could go to the public market and go, "Hey, we're raising some money, we're selling some shares, we're doing this or that."
Right.
What other benefits are there going public? And then what are some of maybe some hurdles?
I think one of the benefits you have is your stock now becomes a currency. Um, a lot of times you can. I know there was a case in one of the deals that we didn't have the money, but we needed to get a clinical trial started. So we paid stock, and they were happy to take it. I think they did okay with it. So in the end, but you get additional currency. Since so if you're cash strapped, you can pay for things in stock. So that always helps. Um, what was the other side of your question? I'm sorry, I got
Yeah,
down that road.
what are some of the things that that could be a hindrance to go public, right? So I'm a founder.
Cost.
Cost. Okay. Talk to us
Cost. So
about some of
that's
the
your
costs.
big thing there is the compliance work that has to be done there. So now you've got to report to the SEC. You've got people don't really realize this, but FINRA is very much involved in public companies. If you want a ticker symbol, that's who gives it to you, not the SEC. So you've got two different regulators, then you got state regulators and things like that. I never heard anything from them before, so I don't know. Usually you got a real problem if they get involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just because you got the additional cost. I mean, I was one of my CEOs. We used to talk about this is where we ran two businesses. We ran the business, then we ran the public business.
Mm-hmm.
So there was the side of keeping the everything up to date, keeping all the filings right, correct, things like that. And then there was the actual running of whatever the business was, whether it be tech, biotech, things like that. So it's almost like running two businesses at once.
Yeah. I think question that popped in my head: are there any companies that are not allowed to go public, or that uh, are like banned from going public? Like, what have you seen anything like that?
Um, I haven't seen one just flat out. I know the SEC has blocked some people I know they blocked some cryptocurrency a while back.
Okay.
So I worked with a cannabis company, and we were doing a filing there, and it was interesting how it was kind of new, and we were vying for licenses in the state of Nevada, and we actually got one, and
Cool.
as a public company. So we were doing a registration statement to register more stock to sell, and the SEC was very clear that we had to make sure we had, in our risk factors that this was federally not legal, even though it was legal in Nevada. And typically, when you do a registration statement, the SEC has, I believe, it's 30 days to reply to it. And if they don't reply or call you or whatever, they're going to review or whatever like that. Then you just automatically can assume the registration statement is good to go. So basically what they did is after they got done reviewing it, they're like, okay, we're not going to tell you this is good, but we're not going to stop you either after the 30 days is up. That was kind of they just kind of let it ride. So it was kind of an interesting how then, how I think this was, 2014. So it's been a little while that we were still able to get there. Couldn't get banking, but we could get registration statement done with the SEC.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely it creates some great opportunities, but also
Right,
some challenges because certain banks, and certain financial institutions will not touch those
right,
kind of businesses.
right.
So what do you do in those kind of scenarios? So it's like can't get banking, like I can't get banking or different types of insurance even. How does that
Uh,
work?
Cash.
Cash
Most
is
of it's in
king.
cash. I know they have changed it since. I don't know
Yeah.
off the top of my head. I just haven't really kept up because I've moved on to other things. So I know there's some other ways of doing it now. But yeah, I mean, at the time, I remember back then, I remember hearing stories about you just walk into a warehouse and there's just stacks of cash. It was it's crazy. The
Crazy
biggest
stuff.
issue was security
Yeah.
back then. That was there was a lot of security companies that just specialized in the cannabis industry. So yeah,
Wow. So, as a founder myself, CEO, uh, I don't think that I would be good at running those multiple businesses, right? Like running my own business, but then
right,
going through the filing, the compliance, and then a public facing thing. Like I'm public enough being, having a podcast shows.
right.
When you're consulting with a group and you're taking a look at the leadership team, the CEO and the leadership team, do companies sometimes need to make some tough decisions prior to going public?
You do. You want to make sure you have the right person at the helm.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. Um, I think a lot of times you get the founders who really understand the whole. I mean, we can look at there's some big names who've gotten in trouble with the SEC because they just kind of do their own thing.
Yeah. Say
But
whatever you want.
exactly, exactly. Or say what you want. That's probably the bigger problem is say what you want in public. You just got to be careful what you do and say. Um, I haven't seen the issues. Had more issues with board members, I think, than the actual teams.
Mm,
In that you want to make sure your board members, especially on the startup side, so this is even before you're public, make sure they understand how that works. Because I know we ran into problems we hired folks that had fantastic resumes. I mean, on paper they were just great and they were nice people. But I think but they came from a Fortune 100 company and they moved through the company. So they had that, that kind of culture is what they're used to. And it doesn't always spill over into the startup world.
No, Fortune
So it's
100 does not communicate well with flip flops
no,
and riding
no,
scooters to work.
no.
No.
Their expectations are much different on how things work than what when you're a small company, you got to be lean. So I remember having an argument with somebody going, okay, we've been around for 5 years without an office, doing all this virtually. And at the time, we had all of our research was done at a university, so we didn't really need facilities. But man, they wanted an office, they wanted a conference room, they wanted desks and chairs, your refrigerator, in the office. It was just a different mindset coming from that world versus what we were used to. So I think, and that, and making sure your board members are of value. Just because again they might have a PhD or all this experience and stuff like that, doesn't mean they can translate that into helping you raise funds or sitting with shareholders and having discussions about those types of things. So it's just make sure you get value out of your board member.
Yeah, and just with the stage of business, like one of the first things that you and I were talking about is know what stage of the business that you really could you enjoy and you could add value to. But that goes along with in investors that you're working with and also board members. So in your
Right.
experience, right, you got to have the right investors and board members for the correct stage of the business, but also on the correct trajectory of the business. So
Right.
what kind of board member, so the Fortune 100, might not be the best fit on taking a company from zero to public. They might be better served later on. What kind of board member would you look for? Let's just say I'm looking to go public and I need to stack the deck on my leadership team and advisory team. So let's start with the board.
So I would say for a smaller company, somebody who's comfortable working with a smaller company has done that type of thing before. If you've been with a company if you were formerly a CEO that went public, I think that's a good fit, especially if they're from a smaller company and built a company from there. Uh, that's probably the best fit. Someone who's just familiar with the space, with the startup mentality.
Got it. Do you ever, get do you ever work in advisory roles where you come on a board and you kind of walk a company through the process of, cleaning up their past so that they could go public? Is an experience that you ever had?
Yes.
Okay, kind of walk
Yes.
us through how you approach that.
So the company that I was working with, they were already public. A couple of these groups. That's kind of the best example. And they, one of them I got involved with. They got delisted from the OTCQB, which is a OTC marketplace listing, down to the pink sheets. They felt that paying rent and themselves was more important than keeping up with their filings, paying the attorneys and accountants to do that. So when you have investors what happens is when you're not up to date on your filings, investors can't get their stock into brokerage accounts. They can't sell it. It just makes it more difficult because of a lot of compliance issues for the shareholders on that side. So when your company's out of compliance, you've got shareholder problems too. So, and that's usually how I came in with the shareholders to say, okay, we got to bring somebody in, and they would usually have enough control or oversight say in it. So I know one of the companies, they were 3 years behind. And that was, I think I came in November, and I think by mid-January we had all 3 years done and out, because
Wow.
that was what they brought me in. That's what they needed. So, and by then we were able to upgrade to a better listing, which gave us, gave liquidity again to the stockholders.
Yeah. For smaller companies, that's probably something that they don't have in house. So they need to bring in expertise externally.
Correct. A lot of companies don't have that in house. Um, you don't want to pay for the CFO, is what happens a lot of times. So it is cheaper to kind of outsource that. So having the right, CFO that knows what's going on, from the not only the compliance side, but help with the investor relations, what shareholders are going to need, those types of things. And then, of course, having good legal counsel is always a good thing.
Hmm.
I found the most expensive legal counsel isn't always doesn't always translate to the best legal counsel. Uh, so I worked with a guy for close to 15 years, and he specialized in small cap companies. That's just what he did.
Hmm.
So there was a few times I'd have to correct attorneys because they didn't understand the small cap world because they worked with larger companies, and there's just different rules from
Hmm.
one to the other. So
Yeah. So, what kind of trouble can a company get into if they're, a public company, maybe OTC, uh, and they want to go Nasdaq, but they have to clean up some stuff compliance wise? Like, what happens if they don't? One, they won't go to, Nasdaq or open up to larger pools of capital. But what other things could go wrong if they don't set up the proper filing?
well, I mean, if you don't have your house in order basically to get out there, or at least if you don't have a plan to fix it,
Yep.
you're just not going to get there. I mean, you have to for NASDAQ, you have to apply, fill out. The form you send to them is not that bad. It's the list you get back from them for all the things they want, all the questions they have. So that can be pretty aggressive to get there. So you want to one of the things they look at, they look at who your investors are. And in the small cap world, one of the problems they have is there's a lot of bad actors out there. So they'll look at who your investors are. And if they see somebody on the list they don't like, that could be an issue for you. So that's one problem is who your investors are. Who are your auditors? I think had one company that wanted us to upgrade, so he was a little too small. So nothing against them. It's just a different preference that they had. And I know that when you do get upgraded, it is a little nicer to have a more named attorney on your package. They trust that a little bit more. So, um, but yeah, it's just making sure you have everything in order. Make sure you don't have any weird contracts out there. A lot of smaller companies take on investments that are not very favorable, so they kind of frown on that. So you might have to get that cleaned up. So if you've got some bad convertible debt with bad terms, that's going to have to get fixed before you're getting uplisted.
Yeah. What are you seeing in the market right now in terms of like SPACs and how they're playing a part in the public, um, market?
Um, I think that they've really kind of opened up a little more opportunity because they just got so popular for a little while there. A lot of companies were able to go public a little easier that way. And it's basically it's blank check companies, and those blank check companies were very popular back in the when I got involved in this, so around 2000, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And back then the blank check companies were just a vehicle to take you public. They had no money in it. At least a SPAC, they've raised money.
Yeah.
So when you move into it, it's basically a way of raising capital, and then and getting onto the public market. Whereas originally these the blank check companies, there was nothing in it. It was just in order to get onto a market, and made it very difficult to do those.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
So let's go back to Viking and the things that you're working on. So what kind of deal would be an ideal project that comes across your plate for a company looking to go public? Like what's an ideal scenario where someone calls you up and they go, Steve, I need help.
Ideal scenario for me is a company that has raised some funds, and they need to raise more. So they're looking at the process of going through the process with FINRA in order to get a ticker symbol, or a lot of times these guys will look for public companies that are kind of defunct, and you can clean those up and then put them into it's considered a shell. You can put them into one of those. Um, so it's really just the beginning stage of wanting to go public. Getting your registration statement done. That's something that I've done many of those, and just getting ready to get your filings going.
Yeah. So in the work that you're doing, why would someone or why should, a company consider working, externally versus hiring, full-time CFO, controller, someone who could go through that process? Like kind of do a compare contrast for us, for stage of business and ideal time to use like a company like Viking.
I think when you use somebody like Viking, I've got the background experience. I've kind of been through the whole process. Where a lot of times you might end up with somebody who has not gone through the entire process. Just because you've worked at a big four or large firm doesn't mean you've been through the whole process. You may have worked with a public company, but you haven't been through the process of getting to the public company there. You haven't worked with the investors and things like that. And that's kind of my background. One of the things that I've learned to working with investors, you got to find the who's the guy who's really in charge of those groups, things like that. So it's just kind of knowing the nuances of it all is the kind of the advantage I think I have over hiring somebody. Plus, I'm a little cheaper. You're gonna hire. I mean, no, it is what it is. But when you hire for somebody full time, I don't need health insurance. I don't need all that kind of fun stuff. I've got that myself. So there is a cost savings to it. So, but then if you want to make sure you get the right person that has the right experience to do it.
Yeah. What movies? Like, let's talk about the arts. What movies about the public markets or about business? Like, what's a movie that stands out that you're like, man, I really enjoyed that?
Um, about public markets and all that. I can't.
Or TV show?
It's funny as I say. This is almost funny. The movie The Accountant,
Okay.
if you remember that,
Yeah,
with
he was like a
Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck. He was an
He
assassin,
basically was
right?
an accountant to the mob and all these bad people and everything and
Yeah.
things like that. And I remember after seeing the movie, I had a friend of mine. He goes, how realistic was that? When they were going through that, and I said they had some really good consultants on that movie because there was a lot of the terminology they were using, how he was getting to certain points, and what they were talking about. Some fraudulent issues that happened in the past with other companies. I mean, those were all true. It was all very real in what they were talking about. I was actually really surprised. And, of course, in the other thing, as far as, investing, you get into billions and, all the crazy things that go there. And, I've had people tell me, goes, oh, that can't happen. That doesn't happen. I'm looking at them going, oh, that's nothing compared to stuff I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. That was such an
It can be
interesting
worse.
show. Yeah. So in the show Billions, so I think for every CPA out there, that should be a part of their, before you graduate, you have to watch Ben Affleck's The Accountant. And
Yeah.
then in the show Billions, who is your favorite character and which one do you think is closest to who you
Closest to who I am. Oh, I don't know if I'm as bad as anybody in that group, I would think.
are?
I'd hope not.
I like the shrink lady. I think she's super cool. I love the way that she can help tune people's up in their brain and how she
And
like understands the business side too. Yeah, I like the
it's
shrink.
so funny. I've told my wife this several times. I said, I wish I could find a Wendy.
Yes.
That's what I want in my. I think that would really be nice, is have that kind of person to give you a good swift kick in the butt and get things going again, or just put things in perspective. And that would be. I think she would be very valuable.
Yeah. She was my favorite character by
Yeah,
far.
yeah.
Um, so as you're doing this, what does the future look like for Viking and for Steve?
Um, my my hope in the future is to be able to do this, continue doing this with lots of companies and get a lot make people very successful. So that's kind of how I look at this. I'm helping the company become successful, and in the end, I get a little help from that too. So I'm not looking to. I like being the guy in the background. So if I can get somebody to where they need to go, let them shine. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Hmm.
So I think I've been doing this long enough that I think it'll be very successful going forward in helping others get this done.
Awesome, man. So for groups out there, right? What's a good way for them to connect with you and have a conversation? Say, hey, we're looking to maybe raise some more money. We're looking to go public, and we could use your help. What's a good way for them to connect with you and maybe do a deal?
Best way to connect is probably through email, Stephen at VikingCFO.com. They can go to the website. I've got my contact information there. They can set up a Zoom call. things of that nature. So we can get together and at least talk and see if there's something there. So
Very cool.
yeah.
What questions should I've asked you on this interview? I know that this is a quick interview to kind of get to know the deal maker and a little bit about the deals. What questions should I be asking about going public, or the part of the process that I completely missed that I should have asked you?
Um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think it's pretty, yeah, and this and what I do, this is I think the two biggest things for people, and three, is knowing the compliance you're getting into, understanding the investors that are involved, and dealing with making sure you got the right board members. I think those three things are the three that are really extremely important,
Yeah,
at
awesome.
least from my side of the world. If you're the CEO, well, then you've got to get a product out there. You've got to make sure all that kind of stuff's going on. But from my side, that was always the three things I found to be very important.
Out of those three things, compliance, investors, board members, which one do you or do you focus on all those as Viking CFO?
All of those primarily compliance. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm really into, making sure that all the filings are done, all the paperwork is done. But as far as just giving the advice on the type of board members you want, and just knowing the personality of investors. You get into investors that some of them are very passive, some of them are very active. You can usually spot that pretty quick up front. So you just got to be ready for that.
Very cool. Well, Steve, thanks for coming on the show today, talking about looking to go public. Companies that are a good fit, and how you help serve them, and some of the things that they can look out for. So I appreciate you coming on the show, fellow deal makers in the audience. Uh, my request to you always is that you reach out to our guests, find a way to connect with them, do a deal with them, but say thank you for being on the show.
No problem.
Audience, yeah, man, absolutely. Audience members, if you're looking at a deal, working on a deal, or like to come on the show and talk about the deal, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, maybe get you on the show next. Till then, talk to you all on the next episode.